I don't care who you think you are. Get off my plane." The words didn't echo. They detonated. The cell phone footage was grainy, shaking slightly in the hands of a passenger 3 rows back, but the audio was crystal clear. You could hear every syllable. You could hear the fury in it, the contempt, the absolute certainty of a man who had never once been told no and did not understand that today was going to be different. Captain Raymond Holt, 54 years old, 30 years in the sky. A man whose square jaw and silvering temples had been cast by the universe for exactly this role, the veteran, the professional, the authority in the room. He was standing in the aisle of his own aircraft, leaning over seat 2B, pointing a finger at a woman who had not raised her voice once. Not once. She was sitting perfectly still. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her expression was the kind of calm that doesn't come from meditation or breathing exercises. It comes from knowing something the other person doesn't know yet. He saw a problem. He saw a target. He saw a black woman in a cashmere sweater who had the nerve to ask a question he didn't like. What he didn't see was the woman who owned every bolt in the plane he was standing in. What he didn't see was the chairwoman of Caldwell Aviation Trust, the company that held the asset papers on this aircraft, the terminal they were parked at, and the fuel logistics company currently servicing his flight. What he didn't see was the person who signed the checks that paid his salary. In less than 11 minutes, Captain Raymond Holt would be removed from his own aircraft in handcuffs by the very officers he himself had called. He had 30 years of flying experience. She had one question about fuel weight. He chose the wrong morning to stop listening. Before we get into what happened next, I need to ask you something first. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your city in the comments below. I genuinely want to know because stories like this one travel and I want to see where in the world justice still lands hard. And if this moment already stopped you cold, if that opening line hit you somewhere, hit subscribe. And give this video a like before we go any further. It takes 2 seconds, and it helps make sure stories like this one reach the people who need to hear them most. We have a lot of ground to cover. This story goes deeper than one bad pilot. It goes deeper than one flight. It goes all the way back to a 22-year-old woman in economy class who opened a notebook and wrote 4 words that would change an industry. But we start here. We start with the rain. Now let's go back to where this all began. The rain at O'Hare International Airport that Tuesday afternoon was not the polite kind. It was the aggressive sideways Chicago kind, the kind that makes the tarmac look like a gray mirror and turns every umbrella inside out before you reach the terminal door. It had been raining since noon. It was now 4:15, and Flight 1147 to London Heathrow was 47 minutes delayed with no clear end in sight. Inside the cabin, the air had taken on that specific texture of collective frustration. Stale recycled oxygen, the smell of wet coats, the sound of overhead bins being wrestled and lost. Passengers shuffled down the narrow aisle with the exhausted aggression of people who had already been waiting too long and were now being asked to wait inside a smaller space. Captain Raymond Holt stood near the cockpit door adjusting his hat in the reflection of the galley window. He was by every external measure exactly what you would want a pilot to look like. Tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of face that belonged on the cover of an aviation magazine from 1987. Passengers who passed him in the aisle felt instinctively reassured. He looked like the man who would get them there safely. They could not see what was happening inside. Rick, as he preferred to be called by colleagues who liked him, a group that had been shrinking steadily for 3 years, was tired in a way that sleep no longer fixed. He was tired of budget cuts that shortened turnaround times and lengthened his responsibilities. He was tired of younger first officers who deferred to the autopilot before they deferred to him. He was tired of passengers who treated the cabin like their living room and the crew like their personal staff. Mostly on this particular Tuesday, he was tired of the delay. Every minute on the ground was a minute lost in the air, and the air was the only place Captain Raymond Holt still felt like himself. Gate agent Brenda Okafor appeared at the jet bridge door shuffling papers, her expression the practiced neutral of someone delivering bad news for the 4th time today. "Captain, the fuel truck is still 12 minutes out. We're getting the updated load sheet as soon as the calculation clears." Holt exhaled through his nose. Sharp. Controlled. 12 minutes becomes 20, Brenda. We're going to lose our slot. Tell them to move faster. Brenda nodded and disappeared. Holt turned back to the cabin. People were still boarding, still shuffling, still dripping. He watched them with the detached, practiced disdain of a man who had long ago stopped seeing passengers as people and started seeing them as cargo fragile, unreliable, and endlessly inconvenient. He had no idea that the most important passenger he would ever meet was about to walk through the door. She didn't rush. That was the first thing you noticed. In a jet bridge full of people hurrying, dragging roller bags, checking phones, angling past each other with the single-minded urgency of travelers who have been delayed, she walked at her own pace, deliberate, unhurried, as if she had calculated exactly how much time she had and found it sufficient. Dr. Vivian Caldwell was in her early 40s, though she carried her age, the way certain buildings carry theirs, with a kind of authority that made the number irrelevant. She wore a charcoal cashmere sweater, dark slacks pressed to a clean line, and loafers that looked worn in the way that expensive things look worn not shabby, but lived in. Comfortable in their own value. Her hair was natural, pulled back in a clean, severe bun that framed a face built for precision. High cheekbones. Eyes that didn't scan a room so much as process it. She carried a single leather tote. It was worn at the corners, the stitching slightly soft with age, the kind of bag that had been somewhere. To a trained eye to anyone who had spent time around Italian craftsmanship, the construction whispered of a price tag that would have made most people blink. Raymond Holt was not a trained eye for that. He saw a worn bag. He filed it accordingly. She paused at the aircraft entrance. 1 second, maybe 2. Her eyes didn't go to the seat numbers above. They went to the panel beside the door, the maintenance log holder, the small metal bracket that most passengers walked past without registering. Her gaze moved across it with the efficiency of someone reading a language they have spoken since childhood. Then she moved on. "Welcome aboard." Sophia Reyes was 24 years old, 6 months into her first flight attendant position, and she had been taught to greet every passenger with the same warmth she would want if she were the one arriving. She smiled genuinely, not performatively. Vivian smiled back. Not the professional smile, not the practiced smile of someone managing an interaction, a real one. Brief and warm. "Good evening." Her voice was low, unhurried, and carried a gravity that seemed to settle the immediate atmosphere like a hand placed gently on a table. She moved to seat 2B. She did not order pre-flight champagne. She did not open Instagram. She did not pull out a neck pillow or arrange her carry-on with the theatrical precision of a frequent flyer performing frequency. She sat down, placed her tote on her lap, and looked out the window. She was watching the ground crew. Specifically, she was watching the position of the fuel truck relative to the aircraft. She was watching the APU exhaust drift from the gate next to theirs, reading the wind, the way a sailor reads a current, not dramatically, just continuously, the way you do when the information matters. She was working. She was always working. From the galley 3 feet away, Captain Raymond Holt watched her. There was something about her stillness that irritated him in a way he couldn't immediately name. She wasn't performing the usual rituals of a first-class passenger, no champagne request, no pointed glance at the delay, no quiet commentary to a neighboring seat. She was simply watching his operation with an attention that felt to him like judgment. He didn't like it. He turned away and poured himself a coffee. He told himself she was nobody. He decided it before she had spoken a word to him. He filed the decision and moved on. That decision would cost him everything. In seat 4C, Maya Torres had her phone out before she was fully seated. She was 26, a travel vlogger with 480,000 subscribers flying to London for a brand partnership she had spent 3 months negotiating. She was good at her job, not because she chased drama, but because she had the instincts of someone who had learned to notice things other people missed. Small things, the way a room shifted, the way energy moved between people before they spoke. She had noticed the way Holt looked at Vivian when she boarded. It was a brief look, 2 seconds, maybe less, but Maya had seen that look before. She had been on the receiving end of that look before. She didn't lift her phone yet. She just kept it close. In seat 3, a Marcus Webb uncapped a pen and opened a small spiral notebook to a fresh page. He was 41, lean, with the slightly distracted energy of someone who is always half listening to the conversation he's in and half listening to every other conversation in the room. He had been an aviation journalist for 14 years, freelance now, which meant he went where the story was. He had boarded this flight because he had a meeting in London about a piece he was writing on crew fatigue and the quietly deteriorating conditions of commercial aviation. He had no idea the story was going to find him before the plane left the gate. He wrote the date at the top of the page, then the flight number, then the time 16:23. He had no reason to write these things down yet. He just always did. Habit. The instinct that something somewhere was always worth documenting. The delay stretched. The air grew staler. A baby in economy began to cry a thin, persistent sound that traveled through the cabin like a slow leak. Vivian continued to watch the ground crew. The fuel truck was still not at the aircraft. She noted this. She noted the angle of the APU exhaust. She noted the time. Then she pressed the call button. Sophia arrived within seconds, moving with the slightly nervous efficiency of someone still calibrating the distance between thorough and hovering. "Yes, ma'am. Can I get you something?" Vivian turned from the window. Her voice was quiet enough that the conversation was private, but clear enough to carry to the galley. "I noticed the refueling truck just pulled away from the adjacent stand, but the fuel load sheet hasn't been brought up yet. And looking at the APU exhaust from Gate 14, the wind shear seems to be building from the northwest. Are we waiting on a new weight and balance calculation for the fuel adjustment?" Sophia blinked. It was a technical question delivered with the casual confidence of someone asking about the lunch menu. Sophia understood about half the words and none of the implications. "I can check with the captain." She didn't get to finish. Captain Raymond Holt had been 3 feet away in the galley pouring his second coffee of the afternoon. He had heard every word. He turned slowly. His eyes went from Sophia to seat 2B. He saw the woman in the cashmere sweater. He saw her looking back at him, neither challenging nor retreating, just waiting for an answer to a reasonable question. He felt the stress of the delay, the impending conversation with his ex-wife he was ignoring on voicemail, and his profound contempt for armchair experts converge into a single tight ball of heat in his chest. He stepped into the aisle. "Excuse me." He didn't make it a question. It was a challenge disguised as courtesy, a habit of men who have held authority long enough to forget that it has to be earned moment by moment. Vivian looked up. She removed her reading glasses with the unhurried precision of someone who is neither startled nor threatened. She met his eyes. "I was asking the flight attendant about the weight and balance calculation, Captain. It appears we've taken on extra fuel for the headwinds, but the load sheet hasn't come up yet. I was wondering." "And what exactly?" Holt said, his voice dropping into the register of theatrical patience, the tone of a man explaining something obvious to someone. Slow. "Would you know about weight and balance calculations?" He let the question sit for a half-second, then answered it himself, smiling slightly. "Did you read a blog post about flying once?" The smile was the cruelest part. Not the words, the smile. The complete and immediate dismissal of her not as a passenger who had asked an inconvenient question, but as a type, a category. A person who could not possibly know what she was talking about, because people like her didn't know things like that. Sophia froze between them. Her eyes went back and forth like a woman watching something she can't stop and can't look away from. "Captain," she said, barely audible. She was just asking, "I don't need you to tell me what she was doing, Sophia." Holt didn't look at her. "I need passengers to sit down, strap in, and let the professionals fly the plane. We are delayed enough without people playing pilot from the cabin." Vivian's expression didn't change. Her voice remained at exactly the same volume and temperature it had been since she boarded. "I'm not playing pilot, Captain. I'm asking a safety question. If the load sheet isn't updated before pushback, we risk a trim issue on rotation." The words "trim issue" landed differently than Holt expected. He had anticipated defensiveness, maybe embarrassment, certainly backing down. Instead, what he heard was fluency, the unself-conscious, confident use of a technical term by someone who had lived inside that language for 20 years. It didn't earn her respect from him. It triggered his insecurity. And insecure men in positions of power are the most dangerous kind. He leaned down. It was a deliberate move calculated to compress the space between them, to use his height and his uniform and his 30 years to make her feel small. He brought his face to within 18 inches of hers, his voice rising just enough, not enough to shout, just enough to carry to the passengers in rows 3 and 4, who had stopped their conversations and were now listening with the careful attention of people watching something that isn't their business but very much feels like it is. "I have 30 years of flying experience. You have a ticket." He said it slowly, letting each word land like a separate stone dropped in still water. "That ticket buys you a seat. Not an opinion, not a consultation. A seat." He paused. "If you're so worried about safety, maybe you should get off the plane." The cabin shifted. It was almost physical, a change in air pressure, in temperature, in the particular quality of attention. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. The baby in economy had gone quiet, as if even it understood something significant was happening. In one, A. Thomas Garrett set down his Wall Street Journal. He was 58, silver-haired, the kind of man who wore his net worth in the way he held his spine. He had been mildly irritated by the delay, mildly irritated by the noise, mildly irritated by the general state of commercial aviation that no longer treated him with the deference he had decided was his due. He watched Holt lean over seat 2B and nodded barely perceptibly. Finally, someone restoring order. In 3A, Marcus Webb's pen started moving. In 4C, Maya Torres lifted her phone. The red recording light blinked on. She was live. Her caption was 5 words typed with her thumb in under 3 seconds. "Something just happened. Watch this. First 30 seconds. 340 viewers." Vivian looked at Holt. She did not lean back. She did not shrink. She met his eyes with the complete steadiness of a woman who has had this conversation before. Not this exact conversation, but this essential conversation, the one that says you don't belong here in 100 different professional registers, and has learned that the only response that works is to refuse to accept the premise. "There is no need for hostility, Captain." Holt laughed. It was a short, harsh sound, the bark of someone who has decided that the person speaking to them is beneath the dignity of a real response. "Hostile. I'm not hostile. I'm running a flight. You're disrupting my crew with nonsense." He spread his hands, looking briefly at the passengers watching, performing reasonableness for an audience while delivering contempt directly to her. "You haven't delayed anything. The paperwork just—" "The paperwork hasn't arrived," Vivian said. She gestured slightly toward the open cockpit door where First Officer Derek Nolan was visible at the flight management computer, his fingers moving with the tense efficiency of someone waiting for data that had not yet come. "I'm not the delay captain. The load sheet is." The color that rose in Raymond Holt's face was not the red of anger exactly. It was the red of exposure, the particular flush of a man who has been wrong in public and cannot survive the experience. She was right. He could see she was right. Nolan was still typing. The sheet hadn't come. She had identified this from seat 2B in under 3 minutes. He could not let her be right. Not her. Not here. Not in front of his crew and his aircraft and the passengers who were supposed to look to him for authority. That he said, his voice dropping to something tight and final, is none of your business. You sit there. You are quiet. Or I will have you removed. He leaned in one last time. Do you understand me? I don't have time for this attitude. Attitude. The word dropped into the cabin like a match into dry wood. Maya Torres's stream 1,200 viewers. Comments arriving in a cascade. Did he just say attitude? She hasn't raised her voice once. Someone find out who she is. Marcus Webb wrote one word in his notebook. Underlined it. Attitude. Then he kept writing. Holt turned his back on her. He walked to the cockpit, each step weighted with the performance of a man who has made a decision and will not revisit it. The door swung shut behind him. The frame shuddered with the force of it. A small rattle, then silence. The cabin was absolutely still. Vivian looked at the door for exactly 1 second. Then she looked out the window. And for a moment, just a moment, private and complete, she was somewhere else entirely. She was 22 years old, and she was at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport in Atlanta, and she was wearing the blazer she had saved for 3 months to buy because she wanted to look right for her first business trip. Her very first, the one that meant she had made it out of the classroom and into the actual world of aerospace. She had graduated top of her class from Georgia Tech 6 weeks earlier. Aerospace engineering, the kind of grades that made professors write recommendation letters that used words like exceptional and once in a generation. She had accepted a junior engineering position at a mid-size aviation firm in Atlanta, the first black woman in the department, a fact that was mentioned in her offer letter with the careful phrasing of an organization that wanted credit for something it hadn't quite figured out how to do properly yet. She walked to the gate with her boarding pass in her hand. First-class company. Paid, the firm always flew junior engineers, first class on client trips, a small grace that meant the world to her at 22. The gate agent was a white man in his 50s, the kind of tired that has curdled into permanent low-grade irritation. He looked at her. He looked at her blazer. He looked at the boarding pass she held out toward him. He did not take it. "Economy's that way, sweetheart," he said, gesturing down the terminal with his chin. She held the boarding pass closer. "This is a first-class boarding pass. I have a confirmed seat." He squinted at it. Not because the print was small, because he was deciding whether to believe it. He called a colleague over a woman his age. Same tired expression. They both looked at the boarding pass. Both looked at Vivian. 90 seconds passed. 90 seconds in which 2 grown adults stood in front of a 22-year-old aerospace engineer and silently communicated their doubt that she could possibly be who her documentation said she was. They let her through without an apology, without acknowledgement, without so much as a nod that said, "We just made you prove something no one else on this line was asked to prove." She sat in her seat. She didn't cry. She opened the small spiral notebook she carried everywhere in those days, and she wrote 4 words at the top of a fresh page. "One day I will own the plane." She looked at those words for a long time. Then she turned to a clean page and started working. 9 years later, she was 31, and she was sitting across a conference table from a team of lawyers who had been reviewing the paperwork for her first major acquisition, a small regional leasing company, 12 aircraft, the deal that would become the foundation of Caldwell Aviation Trust. She was the youngest person in the room. She was the only black person in the room. She was the only woman in the room. The lead lawyer, expensive suit, expensive watch, the practiced confidence of a man who had closed 1,000 deals in rooms like this, had spent 20 minutes directing his questions and handshakes to the man seated next to Vivian, her deputy, her white male deputy who had been very clear in every introduction that he was there in a support capacity. The lawyer shuffled his documents and looked across the table. "Tell Dr. Caldwell we're ready to begin," he said to the deputy. The deputy looked at him, then looked at Vivian, then back at the lawyer. "She's sitting right in front of you," the deputy said. The lawyer blinked. His gaze moved to Vivian as if she had appeared in the chair unexpectedly. She watched him recalibrate, watched him rearrange the architecture of the meeting in his mind to accommodate the fact that the person he had been performing competence for 20 minutes was not who he assumed. She didn't say anything about it. She picked up her pen. "Shall we begin?" she said. She closed the deal in 40 minutes. She drove home. She sat in her car outside her apartment building for 10 minutes, engine running, rain on the windshield. Then she called her mother. "I got it," she said. "I know you did. Baby," her mother said. Back in the cabin of Flight 1147, the cockpit door was still vibrating slightly from the force of Holt's exit. Vivian straightened her sweater. She reached into her leather tote. She opened an app that was not Instagram, not email, not anything that most people had on their phones. The internal secure communications portal for Caldwell Aviation Trust and Halloway Global Logistics. She typed a single message, precise and quiet like a hand placed on a detonator with complete calm. Authorization code 5C1981. Status check on Flight 1147. Pilot Holt Raymond. Pull his full file, now. She put the phone in her lap. She looked out the window. The fuel truck was still not at the aircraft. She had been right. She had always been right. That was never the point. The point was that being right had never been enough, and she had spent 20 years building a world where it finally was. Maya Torres's stream 2,800 viewers. She wasn't narrating. She was holding the phone steady and slightly low, catching the tension between Holt's retreating back and Vivian's stillness in the same frame. The comments were arriving faster than she could read them. "Why did he call security?" She asked a question. "This is discrimination. Someone find out who she is." The flight attendant looks terrified. That last comment was accurate. Sophia Reyes was standing in the galley with her back against the beverage cart, her hands busy folding and refolding a cocktail napkin she didn't need. She was 24 years old, and she had been terrified of Captain Raymond Holt since her second week on the job, when he had reduced a coworker to tears in the galley over a coffee temperature. Since then, she had learned the particular choreography of managing around his moods, how to read the angle of his shoulders when he entered the galley, how to predict from the sound of his footsteps whether it was going to be a manageable shift or one to survive. Today had been survivable until 20 minutes ago. She looked at Vivian. Vivian was looking at her phone, her expression unreadable, her posture unchanged. She looked like someone waiting for a meeting to start. In 3A, Marcus Webb had filled 3 pages. He was writing without looking down his pen, moving in the small, efficient script of someone who has spent years learning to capture exactly what happened, without slowing down to think about it. He wrote names times direct quotes every word Holt had spoken as precisely as he could remember them in the order they had been spoken. He leaned across to the woman in 3B, a teacher named Rachel Morales, who had been gripping her armrests since Holt's voice first rose. I've been on 400 flights, Marcus said quietly. I have never seen anything like this. Rachel Morales said nothing. She nodded. Her knuckles were white. In seat 1, a Thomas Garrett had put down his journal. He pressed the call button. Carol Briggs appeared within seconds. Carol was 47, lead flight attendant, 22 years on the job, and she had learned that her professional survival depended on which way the wind was blowing among the people with power. She had read the situation in the cabin and made her calculation. "Can we get this sorted?" Garrett said, his voice carrying the mild irritation of a man accustomed to having inconveniences resolved quickly. "Some of us have connections." Carol nodded. She moved toward 2B with the smooth efficiency of someone delivering a message that has been sent before. "Ma'am." Carol's voice was warm velvet over cold stone. "The captain has asked that passengers refrain from questioning crew procedures during the boarding process. It would really be best if you just—" Vivian looked at her. Just looked at her. No words. No change of expression. The kind of look that says everything a sentence would diminish. Carol stopped mid-sentence. She stood there for a moment. The second half of her speech evaporated, and then she turned and walked back to the galley. She did not look at Thomas Garrett as she passed him. From the galley, Sophia watched this exchange with wide eyes. Something was shifting in her chest, a slow, uncomfortable rearranging of things she had been keeping in order through willful not looking. The woman in 2B was not what Carol's approach had been designed for. She was not someone who could be managed with velvet and authority. She was something else entirely. Sophia didn't know what yet, but she was beginning to understand that she was going to have to decide before this was over which side of this she was standing on. Holt re-emerged from the cockpit 4 minutes later. 4 minutes. Long enough, perhaps, for a better man to recalibrate. Long enough to recognize that the woman in 2B had identified a genuine operational gap, that the fuel sheet was in fact late, that her question had been professional, and her tone had been measured, and that the smart move, the professional move, was to acknowledge this and move forward. He had not used those 4 minutes well. His expression when he stepped into the aisle was the expression of a man who has spent 4 minutes constructing justifications and emerged more convinced than when he went in. His shoulders were set. His jaw was forward. He grabbed the flight manifest from Sophia without looking at her. "We're pushing back in 2, he announced to the cabin, broadly addressing no one, specifically looking at no one at all in row 2. Vivian unbuckled her seatbelt. The cabin stopped breathing. It was so quiet in that moment that you could hear the rain on the fuselage. You could hear the distant sound of ground crew radios. You could hear the very specific silence of 200 people understanding simultaneously that something irreversible was about to happen. Holt's head snapped toward her with the speed of a man who had been waiting for exactly this. "The fasten seatbelt sign is on," he said, each word its own sentence. "Sit. Down. I need to speak with you, Captain." She stood in the aisle, not blocking him, not advancing, simply standing, her posture the same it had been since she boarded, her voice at the same exact volume it had been for every word she had spoken tonight. "You need to sit down or I am calling the police," Holt said. His voice was climbing now, no longer performing patience, fully committed to the register of a man who has decided to end this. He reached for the interphone. His finger went to the button. "I am done with you. You are a security threat." "I am a security threat," Vivian said, and her voice went up slightly, just enough with perfect timing, "because I asked about fuel weight. You are a threat because you are refusing crew instructions." Holt pressed the button. His voice went through the interphone system up to the gate out to the jetway. "Security to gate 14. Disruptive passenger in 2B. Request immediate removal." The gasp from the cabin was collective, involuntary. The sound a room makes when it witnesses something cross a line from uncomfortable to wrong. Maya Torres's stream, 7,400 viewers. She was not speaking. Her face was fixed in the controlled expression of someone who knows that her silence is more powerful than her commentary. Marcus Webb wrote the time in his notebook, 1447. He circled it. Twice. In one. A Thomas Garrett sat up straighter. His expression had shifted from mild approval to something more cautious, less certain, the expression of a man who had backed a horse and was now watching it run in the wrong direction. Within 3 minutes, the sound of boots on the jetway. 2 TSA officers and 1 Chicago Police Department officer boarded through the forward door, bringing the rain smell with them. They were wet and tired and reading the room with the practiced speed of people who do this every day. They read it immediately. The captain was vibrating with something that looked less like authority and more like barely managed panic. The woman he was pointing at was standing in the aisle with her hands at her sides, her posture impeccable, her expression somewhere between patient and bored. Sergeant Diego Rivera. 14 years on the job. The kind of experience that teaches you to trust the thing you can't quite name, looked from Holt to Vivian and back to Holt. "What's the problem here?" Captain Holt puffed forward. This woman, seat 2B, refused crew instructions, aggressive behavior interference with the flight deck. "I want her off my aircraft. Now." Rivera looked at Vivian. She looked back at him with the calm of a woman who has been patient this long and can be patient a little longer. "Ma'am," Rivera said, stepping forward slightly, "you'll need to gather your things and come with us." "Sergeant?" Vivian's voice was level. "I am happy to comply, but before I do, I need to make one phone call. It pertains directly to the liability of this aircraft." "No calls." Holt's voice went up an octave. "Get her off. Now." Rivera looked at Holt. Something in the captain's energy, the manic certainty, the shaking hands, the way his authority seemed to be running on fumes rather than foundation, made the 14-year veteran hesitate. "Let her make the call," Rivera said. "If it gets her off the plane faster." Vivian dialed. She held the phone up slightly, putting it on speaker with the deliberate clarity of someone who wants every word of this conversation to be heard by every person in this cabin. "Caldwell Aviation Trust Operations. David speaking." The voice on the other end was crisp, British precise. The voice of a man who had been waiting near his phone since the moment Vivian first messaged him. "David." Vivian's voice was very quiet. "I'm currently on Flight 1147 at O'Hare. The pilot, a Captain Raymond Holt, is having me removed by airport police for asking about fuel weight metrics. He has officially declared me a security threat." A half-second of silence. Then, he is doing what Holt laughed. It was the laugh of a man who has heard this move before. The name drop, the call to an important contact, the performative invocation of connections that don't actually exist. He had seen passengers try this. It never worked. "She knows the operations department," he said, addressing Rivera with the smirk of a man about to win. "Officer, take her." Rivera didn't move. David's voice changed register. Subtle but unmistakable, the shift from incredulity to function. "Viv, did you say Holt, Raymond Holt?" "Yes." "Hold the line." Pulling his file now. "And I'm patching Jonathan Marsh in. Do not leave the aircraft." "Her imaginary friend is busy," Holt announced. He turned to Rivera, pointing. "Officer, I have been more than patient. Remove her." Rivera still didn't move. His eyes hadn't left Holt. Then the chime sounded. Not the single ding of a call button. Not the double chime of a boarding announcement. The triple chime, the emergency priority uplink from dispatch. A sound that cut through the cabin noise, through the rain, through everything with the immediacy of a fire alarm. First Officer Derek Nolan appeared in the cockpit doorway. He was 29 years old, and he had the look of a man whose world had just inverted. He was holding the headset away from his head like it had bitten him. His face was the precise color of paper. "Captain." His voice cracked on the second syllable. "Captain, you need to come here. Right now. Not now, Nolan. I'm handling... Rick. Nolan's voice broke entirely, losing its professional veneer in a single syllable. It's the tower, and it's CEO Marsh, on the emergency override line. He swallowed. They're grounding the flight. The words fell into the cabin like stones into still water. Holt stared at him. What? Nolan looked at Vivian, then back at Holt. The expression on his face was awe and terror, in equal parts the expression of a young man who has just understood something that changes the entire shape of the situation he's standing in. They said, "Do not touch the passenger in 2B." His voice was barely audible. They said, "If she leaves the aircraft, the lease on the entire fleet is voided. Effective immediately. Maya Torres's stream 19,000 viewers." She was not speaking. She was not moving. Her hand was completely still, the phone framing the scene, with the steady patience of someone who understands that the image is telling its own story and requires nothing from her. Thomas Garrett had set his phone face down on the tray table. He was looking at the closed cockpit door, with the expression of a man rapidly revising a position he had committed to too quickly. Marcus Webb wrote one sentence in his notebook. Then he put the pen down and looked up, because there are moments a writer knows must be witnessed with the whole body, not just the hands. David's voice came through the speakerphone now patched to the cockpit PA system that Nolan in his shock had accidentally left keyed open, sending every word through every speaker in the aircraft. "Captain Holt, Jonathan Marsh is now on this line. 1 second. 2. Then the voice of the CEO of the airline, a voice that filled the cabin, not through volume but through weight, the unmistakable authority of consequence. "Captain Holt, you have just attempted to have Dr. Vivian Caldwell arrested, the chairwoman of Caldwell Aviation Trust, the company that holds the asset papers on the aircraft you are standing in, the company that owns the terminal you are currently parked at, the company whose fuel logistics division is servicing your flight right now." The voice paused. Every person in the cabin was motionless. "Stand down. Immediately." Every phone in the cabin was raised now. Not pointed at Vivian, pointed at Holt. At the expression on his face as the architecture of the last 47 minutes collapsed in real time. Vivian stood in the aisle. She had not moved. She had not raised her voice. She had the same expression she had walked in with, measured, watchful, slightly quietly disappointed. "As I said, Raymond," she said, very softly, the way you say something to someone who is finally ready to hear it. It was a trim issue. For 3 full seconds, Raymond Holt did not move. He stood in the aisle of the aircraft he had captained for 2 years, holding a phone receiver that had just broadcast the CEO's voice through every speaker in the cabin, and he looked like a man trying to find the exit in a room that has no walls. His brain, 30 years of being the unchallenged authority in this aluminum tube. 30 years of being right by virtue of the uniform on his chest and the rank on his sleeve could not process what had just happened. It kept running the input through systems designed for a different world and returning errors. He tried the first exit. "It's a prank." He turned to Derek Nolan with a smile that had gone slightly manic at the edges. "Braden Nolan, did you set this up? Some kind of retirement gag? Because if this is..." "Rick." Nolan's voice was very careful. That was the emergency override channel. "It's not a joke. That was Marsh. That was the CEO." The smile held for another second. Then it fell. He tried the second exit. "She's not who she says she is." He turned to Vivian, and his voice took on the sharp, accusatory edge of a man who has decided that attack is the only viable defense. "You hacked the line. You're some kind of corporate plant. You can't own this plane. This is a commercial flight," least Vivian said. The word was simple, precise, and delivered with the patience of someone correcting a spelling error. "My firm, Caldwell Aviation Trust, holds the asset papers on this aircraft. We lease the airframe, the engines, and the maintenance contracts to your employer. That relationship is governed by a contract." She tilted her head very slightly. "There is a clause in that contract, Captain. Clause 14B, brand reputation and asset safety. You are currently in violation of both." He tried the third exit, the last one. "Volume. I am the captain." The shout rang through the cabin with the desperate force of a man whose authority is made of paper and knows it. "I am responsible for the safety of this vessel and every person on it, and you are disrupting—" "Sergeant Rivera!" Vivian turned to the police officer who was watching Holt with the focused attention of a man who has made a professional assessment. Her voice was calm, methodical, the voice of someone filing a report in real time. "Under FAA Regulation 14 CFR 91.17 regarding crew member fitness for duty, I am formally stating for the record that Captain Holt is displaying signs of acute emotional distress that render him unfit to operate this aircraft. His behavior since I boarded has included verbal aggression toward a passenger, dismissal of a valid safety concern, fabrication of a security threat, and escalating irrational conduct in a confined space with 200 passengers present." She paused. "One breath. If you allow him to return to the cockpit, you are placing 200 people at risk. I am asking you to act on that." Rivera looked at Holt. He saw the sweat gathering at the man's temple. He saw the hands that couldn't quite stay still. He saw the cornered wild look behind the eyes, not the steady authority of a pilot, but the scattered desperation of a man in free fall who hasn't hit bottom yet. Captain Rivera said, his voice dropping to the particular register that police officers use when they want compliance, not confrontation. "I need you to step back from the passenger. You are listening to her." Holt stepped forward, not backward, moving into Rivera's space with the incredulous aggression of a man who cannot believe the rules of the room have changed without his permission. "I called you. I am the authority on this aircraft. You work for me in this situation. Get this woman—" "Sir, step back." Rivera put one hand up, flat-palmed. "I need you to—" Holt slapped his hand away. The sound was not loud. It was a single sharp impact, the sound of a man slapping away the extended hand of a police officer in a confined space in an airport in front of 200 witnesses. The cabin went so quiet that you could hear the rain. Maya Torres's stream, 31,000 viewers. Her hand was completely still. She wasn't breathing visibly. The comment feed was moving faster than words could be read, a single long cascade of shock. Marcus Webb picked up his pen. He wrote one line. He underlined it twice. "Captain struck officer, 1453. Thomas Garrett in 1A was no longer sitting back. He was leaning forward slightly, his expression stripped of the easy approval he'd been wearing since Holt first stepped into the aisle. He looked like a man who has realized too late that he misread the situation from the beginning. He did not look at Vivian. He looked at the floor. In one motion practiced fluid absolute Rivera and his partner moved. It was not violent. It did not need to be. It was the movement of authority expressing itself without negotiation, the kind of motion that ends conversations. Rivera's partner took Holt's right arm. Rivera took the left. Together they turned him gently, but with a finality that could not be mistaken for anything other than what it was. The handcuffs produced their sound, that cold mechanical click, and the cabin absorbed it in the particular silence that follows something irreversible. Captain Raymond Holt, a man who had flown through the leading edge of a hurricane over the Atlantic in 2011, who had executed a dead stick landing in Denver in 2015, who had 7,200 flight hours and a wall of commendations in his home office, made a sound that had never appeared on any of those commendations. He yelped. It was involuntary, brief, and undignified, the sound of a man who had never imagined the story ending this way. Richard Holt Rivera said, his voice steady and formal. "You are being detained for assaulting an officer and creating a disturbance aboard a commercial aircraft. You can't." Holt's voice had lost its register, dropping to something thin and cracked. "I'm the pilot. I'm the pilot. You can't fly without me. I'll have your badges. But the words were already echoing off the walls of a smaller and smaller room. As Rivera prepared to walk Holt toward the door, the captain was angled forward at the waist, and for a moment, a brief, unrepeatable moment, he was looking at the floor. Specifically, he was looking at a pair of worn Italian loafers. The loafers of the woman in 2B who had not moved from the aisle since she stood up to make her phone call. He had looked at those shoes when she boarded and filed them as ordinary. He had not looked at them again. Vivian crouched very slightly, just enough to bring her eyes level with his. He looked up at her. "You wanted to know who I thought I was, Raymond." He stared at her. His face was still flushed, still contracted with everything that had just happened, but something behind his eyes had shifted. The bluster had run out. What was left underneath was smaller and older and considerably less sure of itself. "I'm the person who signs the checks that pay for the fuel you were too lazy to verify." Her voice was not raised. It was not triumphant. It was simply factual in the way that the most devastating things often are. "And I'm going to make sure you never sit in a cockpit again, not because you were rude to me, but because when you were challenged, you chose your ego over 200 lives. That's not a bad day. That's a character failure." She held his eyes for one more second. "And for the record, Raymond." The smallest pause. The wind shear was picking up. She stood. She straightened her sweater. She turned back toward her seat. Holt had no words. His mouth opened once, closed. The magnitude of the error, not just the professional error, but the profound foundational wrongness of every choice he had made in the last 52 minutes, was arriving all at once, the way large things arrive, not gradually but suddenly, as a single crushing weight. "Get him off the asset," Vivian said to Rivera, calmly, the way she might issue a logistics instruction. The extraction was slow. The aisle of a commercial aircraft is not designed for the rearward shuffling of a large man in handcuffs flanked by 2 officers. It took time. It required a careful, sideways, apologetic choreography that gave every passenger in every row a full, unobstructed view of what the last hour had produced. Holt was not shouting anymore. The adrenaline had crashed, leaving in its wake a gray, stunned quiet, the specific silence of a person who has destroyed something that cannot be rebuilt. He looked at the faces of the passengers he was moving past. Some were filming. Some were whispering. Some were looking away. The elderly woman in 1A, who had been quietly knitting a scarf since before boarding and had watched the entire incident unfold over the top of her reading glasses, looked at him with an expression that was not angry. It was something worse. It was pitying. In 3C, a teenage boy had his phone raised red, recording light. Steady, the calm, unblinking documentation of someone his age, who has grown up understanding that evidence is permanent. He was very still. He was getting everything. "Stop recording," Holt said. His voice was barely there. "Keep walking, sir," Rivera said. They passed the galley. Sophia Reyes was pressed against the beverage cart, her back flat against the cool metal, as if she needed something solid behind her. She was crying quietly, not dramatically, the silent tears of someone who has been holding something in for a long time and has finally been given permission to release it. Holt stopped. Rivera's hand tightened on his arm. Holt looked at Sophia. In that moment, he looked not like a captain, but like a man grasping at the last thing he thought he had. Sophia. His voice was rough, stripped of its authority, something underneath it that sounded almost human. Tell them I'm a good pilot. Tell them how many times I've handled bad weather. Tell them about Denver." Sophia looked at him. She was 24 years old. She had spent 6 months walking on eggshells. She had rehearsed in her head every morning before a shift what she would say if he yelled at her again, the careful de-escalating scripts she had developed because the alternative was to dread every single day of work. She thought about all of those mornings. She thought about the colleague he had made cry over a coffee temperature. She thought about the passenger in 2B who had asked a reasonable question and been publicly humiliated for it. She looked at the handcuffs. She looked at Vivian standing quietly by her seat. "I think you should go, Captain Holt," Sophia said. Softly, without hesitation. The words were not angry. They were simply true. And that was why they hit him harder than the handcuffs. His shoulders dropped. The last resistance went out of him. He allowed himself to be guided down the remaining length of the aisle, past the faces and the phones, and the silence through the forward door into the jet bridge and out into the cold, wet Chicago evening. He did not look back. For a moment, the cabin simply breathed. It was an involuntary collective exhalation, the sound of 200 people releasing something they had been holding since the first shout. Then the confused, leaderless quiet of a room that has been through something and doesn't quite know what comes next. A plane without a captain is a bus that cannot move. Vivian didn't sit down. She stood in the open space at the front of the cabin, not performing authority, not commanding attention, simply present in the way that certain people are present when a room needs an anchor. She smoothed the front of her sweater with a single unhurried motion. She looked at Derek Nolan. He was still in the cockpit doorway, leaning against the frame with the expression of a 29-year-old who has just witnessed the complete professional disintegration of his captain and is not sure what the correct protocol is for that. "Officer Nolan," Vivian said, "are you qualified to taxi the aircraft back to the hard stand while the airline arranges a replacement crew?" Yes, Dr. Caldwell." His voice had lost several years of practiced composure. He sounded his age. "Good. Coordinate with ground control. Tell them we're declaring a crew timeout. Medical incident, stress-induced incapacitation of the captain. That language keeps the airline's face intact and avoids triggering a full federal investigation tonight. We want to get these people moving, not stuck in paperwork." Nolan blinked. She was managing the crisis with a precision and a grace that the airline's own crisis team would have taken 30 minutes to reach. He disappeared into the cockpit. Vivian turned to the cabin. Faces watched her, some still shocked, some starting to recalibrate, some with expressions that had been moving through several stages in rapid succession. From 1A, Thomas Garrett cleared his throat. His voice had lost its earlier authority. He sounded, for the first time, uncertain. So he said carefully, "You actually own the airport." Vivian allowed herself a small, genuine smile. The second one, since she'd boarded. "I own the holding company that manages the terminal logistics contracts." She paused. "But effectively, yes." Thomas Garrett looked at the tray table. He did not respond. There was nothing in his social toolkit designed for this particular moment. Nervous laughter rippled through the cabin, the specific, fragile laughter of people who have been very tense for a long time and have just found a small, safe way to release it. It moved through the rows like a quick, gentle wave. The tension didn't disappear, but it cracked, and through the crack, something that felt slightly like relief began to come through. Vivian walked to the galley. Sophia was still against the beverage cart. The tears had stopped, but her eyes were red, and she was holding a cocktail napkin she didn't need folding and refolding it with the automatic motion of someone who needs her hands to do something while the rest of her catches up. Vivian didn't announce herself. She walked to the cart and stood beside Sophia, not in front of her, not looming beside. She took a cocktail napkin from the stack and held it out. Sophia looked at it, then at Vivian. Something in her face was very young for a moment, stripped of the professional composure she had been holding since boarding, just a 24-year-old woman in the aftermath of something that had shaken her more than she'd let show. "Sophia," Vivian said. "Look at me." Sophia looked up. You didn't do anything wrong. You tried to intervene. Twice. You were professional when he dismissed you. You didn't lie when he asked you to confirm his version of events. Vivian's voice was steady and low and absolute. That took more courage than you know. I should have done more, Sophia said. I could see it was wrong from the beginning. I saw the way he looked at you when you boarded, and I knew. You are 24 years old, Vivian said. You have been managing a senior captain who has bullied his crew for years, and you have been managing him alone without support because the structure that was supposed to protect you didn't. That ends tonight. She paused. Not because of me. Because you stood in that aisle and told the truth when he asked you to cover for him. Sophia's eyes were filling again. The report that gets written from tonight's events, Vivian, continued. Will commend you by name for your poise and your integrity under conditions that would have broken more experienced crew members. You will not be fired. You will not be penalized. You will be recognized. She reached into her tote. The business card was thick, the kind of cardstock that has weight in the hand, the gold embossing of a company that does not need to prove itself. She held it out. When you land in London, whenever that is, and we're going to sort that out right now, call the number on this card. My executive assistant is expecting you. I've arranged 10 days of paid leave. Use it. Sophia took the card with both hands as if it were something that might be fragile. Thank you, she whispered. I didn't know who you were. You treated me with respect when you thought I was nobody, Vivian said. Her voice went up slightly, not enough to address the cabin, but enough for the passengers in the first several rows to hear clearly. That is the only thing that has ever mattered to me. Character isn't how you treat the CEO, it's how you treat the person in 2B who asks for a glass of water. A silence followed that was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that comes after something true has been said in a room. Sophia looked at the business card. She turned it over once. Then she pressed it carefully between her palms as if she was worried it might disappear. Vivian walked back to the front of the cabin. She stood in the space just forward of row 1, not behind a podium, not using the interphone, just standing in the aisle with the same complete, unperformed presence she'd had since she boarded. The cabin quieted without being asked to. Something about her made a room want to listen. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, I want to tell you what's going to happen next, and I want to be direct with you because you have been patient and you deserve honesty. She looked down the rows. Every face was watching. The bad news is that without a qualified captain, this flight cannot legally depart. We are going to need to deplane while the airline arranges a replacement crew. That process will take time. She let that sit for exactly the right number of seconds. I'm sorry. I know you've already been waiting too long. The groan started to build. She raised one hand, not commanding, just steady, and it stopped. The good news. She paused. I have instructed the gate staff to issue full refunds on every ticket on this flight. Economy, business class, and first. Not vouchers for future travel. Refunds. Cash back to the card you used to book within 3 to 5 business days. The silence that followed this announcement was the particular silence of people who are making sure they heard correctly. Then someone in the back of economy said loudly, she said, refunds. The silence broke. Not into a groan, into the surprised, disbelieving sound of people recalibrating towards something better than expected. Furthermore, Vivian's voice stayed level, unhurried. I have a Gulfstream G650 in the private hangar 400 meters across the tarmac. It is departing for London in 2 hours. It has 14 seats. She looked down the rows. Priority on those seats goes to families traveling with children under 10 passengers with confirmed medical needs and anyone with a connecting flight in London departing before noon tomorrow. Please see Sophia Reyes in the forward galley to put your name forward. A full, open moment of stunned quiet. the kind that comes before applause. For everyone else, the airline will arrange confirmed hotel suites at the Marriott tonight, all meals included, and double-value flight vouchers for rebooking on any route. These will be handed out at the gate desk as you deplane. The applause, when it came, was not wild. It was deliberate, the steady, purposeful clapping of people who have witnessed something and feel compelled to mark it. It moved through the cabin like weather genuine and unstoppable. Vivian didn't bow. She didn't smile broadly. She nodded once, briefly, and the nod said, "This isn't a performance, it's a correction, and it was the minimum that was owed to you." Because that was exactly what it was. She was not buying goodwill. She was repairing a failure. In her world, those were not the same thing. In her world, the difference between the two mattered enormously. Her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. David. Viv. Problem. Holt didn't go quietly to the station. His brother-in-law runs a talk radio program in Chicago, already spinning. Twitter is moving fast. You need to see it. She opened the app. Trending Stand with Holt. She scrolled to the source. A tweet from an account that had been created 40 minutes ago, clearly not by Holt himself, the language too polished, the framing too practiced for a man currently being processed at an airport police substation. Captain Rick was dragged off his own plane tonight for refusing to let a woke passenger tell him how to fly from seat 2B. 30 years of perfect service. Decorated veteran. Removed in handcuffs because someone with a big wallet didn't like his tone. Sad day for aviation. Pilot writes, Stand with Holt. Below it, 4,000 retweets in under an hour. Vivian stared at the screen for a long moment. The narrative was a masterpiece of selective truth. She was wealthy. She had questioned him. He had been removed from the aircraft. Everything else had been surgically amputated. What remained was a story about power and entitlement that pointed in entirely the wrong direction. She looked out the rain-streaked window. The police car was a pair of red taillights disappearing into the gray evening. You really should have checked the wind shear, Raymond, she thought. She opened the Twitter reply field. She looked at it for 4 seconds. She closed it. She would not fight him with words. She would fight him with evidence. She would fight him with the one thing that could not be spun, edited, reframed, or hashtagged his own voice, saying exactly what he had said in exactly the way he had said it. She turned to where Derek Nolan had just emerged from the cockpit, pale and cooperative and desperate to be on the right side of what was happening. "Nolan," she said. "The cockpit voice recorder. Pull the circuit breaker before the ground power cycle. Do not let the loop reset." Nolan frowned. "The CVR, why?" "Captain Holt is about to tell the world a story," Vivian said. Her voice was very quiet. Her eyes were not. "I want the world to hear his actual voice." Nolan looked at her for exactly 1 second. Then he went back into the cockpit without another word. He understood now. Not partially, not theoretically. He understood with the full clarity of a 29-year-old who had been standing in the epicenter of something that had just redrawn the map of his career and possibly the industry around it. He understood that the woman who had been sitting in 2B asking a reasonable question about fuel weight had been 10 moves ahead of every other person on this aircraft since before the boarding door closed. He understood that the data card in the cockpit voice recorder was not just a piece of aviation safety equipment tonight. It was a detonator waiting for the right hand to arm it. He pulled the circuit breaker with the careful precision of someone handling something important. He marked the panel with a maintenance tag. He confirmed with ground control that the aircraft would remain on its current power configuration until further notice. Then he sat in the right seat for a moment, the seat that had been his for 6 months, always in the shadow of the left, always subordinate to the captain, and he looked at the empty left seat. He thought about what the captain of this aircraft had done tonight. He thought about the 30 years of authority that had apparently never included a single genuine moment of self-examination. He thought about the way that kind of unchecked certainty, the kind that never has to answer to anything, eventually produces exactly the moment he had just witnessed. He thought about the fuel load sheet still sitting in the printer tray where it had finally arrived 12 minutes late, with a weight and balance calculation that showed clearly unmistakably that a new trim setting was required before pushback. She had been right. From the beginning, she had been right. He picked up the orange data card from the recorder cradle and placed it in the small padded envelope that the regulations required for chain of custody documentation. He sealed it. He wrote the time and his name on the seal. He brought it to the forward galley and placed it in Vivian's hand. "The recording is preserved," he said. "Audio from 45 minutes before the incident through 15 minutes after. All of it." "Thank you, Nolan," Vivian said. He nodded. He went back to the cockpit. He had a taxi instruction to execute and a ground control channel to coordinate, and he was going to do his job with the complete professionalism of a first officer who has just decided very clearly which kind of pilot he intends to become. Vivian held the orange envelope lightly in one hand, looking at it, the small, rugged weight of it, the evidence that the story was now hers to tell, not on social media, not in a press conference, not in a legal filing. In a room, privately, with the people who needed to hear it most. The private hangar of Caldwell Aviation Trust was the kind of space that existed in a different ecosystem from the terminal across the tarmac, where the terminal was noise and light and the aggressive democracy of commercial travel. This space was quiet-specific and possessed of the particular calm of rooms built for people who have stopped needing to prove things. Beige leather, polished concrete, floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the runway where the Gulfstream G650 sat in the floodlit dark like a well-rested animal. Chicago rain against the hangar roof, a deeper, more resonant sound at this scale, less like weather and more like percussion. It was 2:14 in the morning. David Osei had flown in from New York, arriving 40 minutes after the incident. He was 51 precise and had worked for Vivian long enough to read the specific quality of her silences the way other people read faces. He sat across from her now with a tablet illuminating his features in blue-gray light and the expression of a man delivering intelligence he would have preferred not to have. "It's trending worldwide now, Viv," he swiped to show her. "Top 3 in the U.S. The narrative has fully set. He's a decorated veteran defending the integrity of his cockpit against a passenger who used her wealth as a weapon." He set the tablet down. "They're calling him a hero of the skies." Vivian sat with her hands folded on the table, her tea untouched. She looked out at the runway. "Read me the main thread," she said. "You don't need to—" "I need to know the blast radius, David. Read it." He sighed. He scrolled. "This is from a Jack Reynolds, the radio host. Holt's brother-in-law." He cleared his throat. It says, "My brother Captain Rick, a 30-year veteran, decorated a man who has landed planes in conditions that would make most people quit, was dragged off his aircraft tonight like a criminal." Why? Because he refused to let a billionaire passenger in seat 2B tell him how to fly. She didn't like his tone, so she bought the airport and fired him. This is the new America. This is what happens when we let money replace competence. Stand with Rick. He stood for all of us. Vivian was quiet. 400,000 impressions. David continued. The union has issued a statement. The Allied Pilots Association. They're calling for immediate reinstatement, a formal apology, and a review of what they're describing as dangerous passenger interference in crew operations. They're threatening a work-to-rule action if he's not reinstated by morning. They're defending the institution, Vivian said. They don't know yet what the institution actually did tonight. They know what it looks like from the outside, and from the outside, it looks like their man got hurt. She paused. The stock price on the leasing arm, down 2% in after hours. The board is going to want you to settle. Pay him off. NDA. Make it go away before the markets open. Vivian turned from the window. in the floodlit quiet of the hangar with the rain on the roof and the sleeping plane on the tarmac. She looked like what she was, a woman at the absolute center of her own power, making a decision she had made before and would make again every single time. "Settling is what allows men like Raymond Holt to thrive," she said. Her voice was not raised. It carried the way certain low sounds carry, not through volume, but through absolute clarity. "They bank on our exhaustion. They bank on the calculation that exposure costs more than silence, that every time the math works out in their favor." She paused. "I have been doing the math differently for 20 years, and I am not starting tonight." She stood up. She walked to the far end of the lounge, to the mahogany desk, where a small orange ruggedized data card sat in its padded envelope. "Get me Cleric and Guan on the phone, and find me a conference room." The O'Hare Comfort Inn 3 miles from the terminal was not the kind of place Captain Raymond Holt normally stayed. He was a Marriott man. Bonvoy Point's upgrade requests a particular preference for the corner room on the 14th floor. Tonight he was in room 114 ground level with a view of the parking lot and a bathroom where the grout needed attention. He had been processed, fingerprinted, and released on his own recognizance pending a hearing. They had returned his phone. His lawyer, court-appointed, middle-aged, visibly exhausted by 11 p.m., had gone home with a promise to call in the morning. Holt was alone with his phone, and his phone was telling him he had won. The stand with Holt notifications were arriving faster than he could clear them. A GoFundMe for his legal fees, set up by someone he didn't know, titled "For the Captain Who Stood His Ground," had raised $43,000 in under 3 hours. His follower count on Twitter had jumped by 12,000 since the incident. Comments were calling him a legend, a hero, a man who had stood up for the principle that passengers do not fly the plane. He scrolled. He felt the vindication move through him like warmth, and he held on to it. "She thought she could crush me," he said to the empty room, his voice carrying the slight uplift of someone rehearsing a line. He had been saying versions of this to himself for the last 2 hours, and it had not yet stopped feeling true. "She made me famous instead." His lawyer had warned him carefully and precisely that the evidence against him was substantial, that striking a police officer was a serious charge, that there were multiple witnesses and a great deal of video. Holt had listened to this with the patient condescension of a man who knows that lawyers worry about things that don't matter. He knew the court of public opinion. He had lived in the court of public opinion for 30 years. He knew what a jury looked at when they had to choose between a veteran pilot and a wealthy black woman in a cashmere sweater. He knew which story was easier to believe. He did not think about the cockpit voice recorder. When it briefly occurred to him, a passing uncomfortable shadow at the edge of the warm glow of his phone screen, he pushed it away. The CVR data was protected by federal privacy rules. She couldn't touch it. He did not know about the aircraft being in a private leasing fleet. He did not know about the anti-hijacking cloud protocol that had been recording cockpit audio to a secure server since the moment the aircraft connected to gate power. He did not know that 6 miles away in a hangar that his paychecks had helped to build, a small orange data card contained his own voice saying things that would destroy everything he was currently celebrating. He put the phone face up on the nightstand. He lay back on the bed with his hands behind his head. He stared at the ceiling with the expression of a man who believes the worst is over. Outside the Comfort Inn in the parking lot, a freelance aviation journalist was sitting in a rented car with the engine running and a laptop open on the passenger seat. Marcus Webb had interviewed his editor at The Atlantic by phone 40 minutes ago. He had shared his notes, his timestamps, his direct quotes. He had described in precise and careful detail exactly what he had seen from seat 3, what had been said in what order, with what tone, at what time. His editor had said, "How fast can you file?" Marcus looked at the motel room window where a light had just gone off. Holt going to sleep. Sleeping on what he thought was a victory. Marcus started typing. He typed quickly, and without drama the way you type when you were there, and the truth is already fully formed. He filed at 12:47 a.m. The conference room occupied the full east wall of the hangar's upper level, and through its floor-to-ceiling glass you could see the runway. The Gulf Stream still sleeping under the floodlights, and beyond it the distant tower lights of O'Hare, blinking in the rain. It was 2 a.m. On one side of the long granite table sat 3 representatives from the Allied Pilots Association. Captain Gerald Fowler led them, 62, broad-shouldered, built like a man who had spent decades in institutional authority and had absorbed its posture permanently. Beside him sat Patricia Cole, the union's legal advisor, 45, sharp-eyed with a legal pad and the contained energy of someone who has already decided how this meeting is going to go. On her other side sat Trevor Mills, the youngest Rep. 38, who kept glancing at his phone with the slight guilty urgency of someone monitoring a situation that is changing faster than the meeting can address it. They had been woken. They were not happy. They had driven through the rain with the collective energy of people defending something they believed in, and that belief was currently armored with the specific outrage of people who have not yet seen everything. Across the table alone, no lawyers, no aides, no support staff, Vivian Caldwell, 1 glass of water, 1 laptop, the orange envelope on the table to her right. Dr. Caldwell. Fowler opened with the blunt weight of a man who negotiates for a living and wants the other side to know it from the first syllable. I'll be direct. This is highly irregular. We are here as a courtesy. Captain Holt is a 30-year veteran with a clean record and documented commendations. What happened on that aircraft tonight has the potential to damage not just one pilot's career, but the relationship between airline management and crew at every level. We are asking you formally as a courtesy to drop the criminal charges, accept a private settlement, and let this be handled through internal channels. He sat back. He had delivered this speech before in different rooms with different names. It had worked most of those times. Vivian let him finish. Then she was quiet for exactly long enough to make clear that the pause was intentional. Captain Fowler, she said, I appreciate you coming at this hour. I know you believe you're defending a principled man, and I respect the institution you represent. So let me tell you why I asked you here, and it has nothing to do with pressure. She looked at him steadily. I brought you here because at 8 o'clock this morning you are going to make a decision in public about whether the Allied Pilots Association stands behind Captain Raymond Holt, and I want you to make that decision with full information, because right now you have his version of events, and his version has some significant gaps. Fowler's jaw tightened. Rick has an excellent record. He has a managed record, Vivian said, simply, without heat. 14 documented passenger complaints over 7 years, 3 HR citations, and probationary status issued in March of 2023, following an anger management incident in which he berated a gate crew until one of them required a medical response. All of which I can document. She paused. But that's for the discovery phase. What I want you to hear tonight is something more immediate. She turned the laptop screen so all 3 of them could see it. The audio waveform sat in the player window. A long file time-stamped the visual signature of every word that had been spoken in the cockpit and cabin of Flight 1147 in the 11 minutes preceding and following the incident. Patricia Cole's pen stopped moving on her legal pad. Trevor Mills put his phone face down on the table. This aircraft is part of my private leasing fleet, Vivian said. Because of its security classification, cockpit audio is hardwired to a secure cloud server whenever the aircraft is connected to gate power. It's an anti-hijacking protocol, a requirement I implemented after a security review in 2021. She looked at Fowler. What this means is that I have a complete, continuous, authenticated recording of everything that was said on that aircraft from the moment it docked at Gate 14 tonight. The room was quiet in the specific way of rooms where something is about to become irreversible. I'm going to play 4 minutes of it, Vivian said. I want you to listen. And then I want you to tell me whether the man on this recording is the man you want to put on your posters." She pressed play. The ambient sound of the aircraft filled the room. First the low, constant hum of systems, the subtle creak of the fuselage rain on the aluminum skin. Then voices clear and close. Holt's voice, irritable, dismissive, the specific impatience of a man who has decided the delay is a personal insult. 12 minutes becomes 20. "Brenda, tell them to move faster." Then the chime of a call button. Sophia's voice, young and professional. "Yes, ma'am. Can I get you something?" Then Vivian's voice, and Fowler heard it for the first time. The actual voice, not the version Holt had described. Measured, technical, completely reasonable. "I noticed the refueling truck just pulled away, but the fuel load sheet hasn't been brought up yet. And looking at the APU exhaust from gate 14, the wind shear seems to be building. Are we waiting on a new weight and balance calculation?" Fowler listened with the attention of a man who has been in this industry for 40 years and knows what he just heard. He knew what a legitimate safety inquiry sounded like. He was hearing one. Then, Holt's voice, the mockery landing in real time, inescapable. "And what exactly would you know about weight and balance calculations? Did you read a blog post about flying once Patricia Cole looked at her legal pad? She did not write anything." The recording continued. The escalation, the leaning in, the volume rising, and then the door slamming. And then Vivian let it run without pause, without warning the cockpit audio from the 30 seconds after the door closed. The ambient hum of systems. Holt's breathing audible and heavy. Then his voice to Nolan, low, ugly, stripped of the performance for passengers speaking the way people speak when they believe no one can hear them. "I'm not checking anything. I'm not letting some diversity hire in 2B tell me how to run my ship. Who does she think she is? Probably married to a rapper." A silence. "I'm going to have the cops drag her off. Watch. It'll be funny. Teach her a lesson about respect." Vivian pressed stop. The room was absolutely still. The rain on the hangar roof continued at the same pace it had maintained for hours, indifferent to what it was, above patient and constant. Outside, the runway lights blinked in their slow mechanical rhythm. Gerald Fowler's face had undergone a complete revision. The authority was still there, embedded too deeply to dissolve in one sitting, but underneath it, something else. The expression of a man who has been handed evidence that collapses the version of reality he drove through the rain to defend. He cleared his throat. When he spoke, the bluster had gone out of his voice entirely. "He said she was aggressive," Fowler said, almost quietly. "He said she tried to approach the cockpit." "He lied," Vivian said, simply, without inflection. He profiled a passenger before she said her first word. He dismissed a valid safety concern because of his ego and his assumptions about who she was. He used law enforcement as a tool to humiliate her. And when he was in the cockpit where he believed no one could hear him, he said what he actually thought. She leaned forward. Not aggressively, just closer so there was no possibility of misunderstanding what came next. "You have one choice, Captain Fowler. You can continue to back him. Let the hashtag run. Let the statement stand." And at 8 a.m., I release this recording to the New York Times, to CNN, and to the 4 aviation safety boards I currently sit on. I will let the world hear exactly what the Allied Pilots Association has chosen to defend tonight. Every syllable. The pause that followed was the weight of that. "Or," she said, "you issue a retraction before the market opens. You pull his legal funding. You strip his union protection for gross misconduct and violation of the ethics charter. You let the process run without interference." She sat back, and in the statement you issue, you include a line confirming that Caldwell Aviation maintains the highest safety standards and that tonight's events represent a fundamental breach of crew professionalism. That keeps my stock price where it belongs. Patricia Cole had not moved since the recording ended. Now she looked at Fowler. A small, slight, definitive shake of her head. The case was dead. The tape was indefensible. There was no version of diversity hire probably married to a rapper that wins in any court anywhere in the world, and they all knew it. Fowler looked at his hands for a moment. He was a man of the old guard, built by an era that did not require the kind of self-examination that the next 30 seconds would demand. But he was also a professional, and professionals, when confronted with indefensible evidence, ultimately know the only direction available. "If we pull support," he said, slowly, as if each word had to be extracted with effort. "He loses his pension. His license? He is finished in this industry." "He finished himself," Vivian said, "when he decided his pride was worth more than 200 lives. She held Fowler's gaze. "Do we have a deal?" Fowler looked at Patricia Cole. She was already closing her legal pad. He looked back at Vivian. He nodded. "Draft the statement tonight," Vivian said. "Have it ready to release at 6 a.m. And Captain Fowler." She closed her laptop. "Make sure your people understand why. Not because you were forced to, because it was right." The union representatives gathered their things in silence. They filed out through the glass door, into the corridor, down the stairs, and out into the rain, moving with the heavy, careful steps of people who have just been inside a room where the ground shifted. Vivian didn't feel triumph when the door closed. She felt, as she always felt in these moments, a deep and familiar tiredness. The tiredness of knowing that this conversation should never have been necessary, that the recording should never have existed, that a woman should be able to ask a legitimate question about the safety of the aircraft she was sitting in and receive a professional answer, that the question of who owned the plane was not the point, had never been the point, should never have needed to be the point. She looked out at the runway. The Gulf Stream was still there, waiting. She picked up her water glass. She finished it. She stood up and went to find David because there were still 6 hours of work between here and the market opening, and the work was not going to do itself. At 4:17 a.m., The Atlantic published the piece. The headline was 14 words, "I was in row 3A." Here is what actually happened on Flight 1147. There was no byline photo, no pull quote, no introductory editorial note, just Marcus Webb's name, the timestamp and the text. 3,500 words of journalism so clean and precise that it read like the transcript of something witnessed by a camera that had no stake in the outcome. He had written it in real time, essentially. The notes taken in the cabin transformed into narrative with the steady, undramatic authority of a man who understands that the facts presented accurately and in order are more devastating than any editorial commentary could be. He named everyone. He quoted directly. He included the timestamps from his notebook. He noted the moments of escalation, not interpreting them, just documenting them, letting the sequence speak with the simple eloquence of chronology. He ended with one observation of his own, the only editorial judgment in the piece. In 47 minutes on the ground at O'Hare, I watched a senior pilot make 10 consecutive decisions, each of which made the next one harder to reverse. None of them had anything to do with flying an airplane safely. All of them had everything to do with who he decided the moment she walked through the door that the woman in 2B was. By 5:30 a.m., the article had been shared 40,000 times. By 6 a.m., it had been shared 120,000 times and was the most read piece on the Atlantic's website. Maya Torres woke up to her phone vibrating across her nightstand in the London hotel where she had arrived on Vivian's Gulfstream at 3 a.m. The notification she saw first was not a news alert. It was a subscriber count 648,000. She had been at 480,000 when she boarded Flight 1147 14 hours ago. She lay there for a moment looking at the number. Then she looked at the notifications that were still arriving in a steady, unbroken stream from people all over the world who had watched the live stream and found it by search, by share, by the particular momentum of something that won't stop spreading because it is true, and it matters. She sat up. She reached for her laptop. She had a video to finish editing. The hashtag Stand with Holt had gone quiet at 3:42 a.m., in its place, trending worldwide Flight 1147. In second place, trending for the first time, she never raised her voice. The light that came through the Comfort Inn curtains was gray and specific, the kind of morning light that has no warmth in it, just illumination. Raymond Holt reached for his phone before he was fully awake. The muscle memory of a man who had spent 3 good hours sleeping on the faith that the world was still going his way. He unlocked the screen. The first notification was not from a fan. It was from the Allied Pilots Association's communications office. The subject line was 3 words, and Holt read them 3 times with increasing incomprehension before the meaning fully arrived. Revocation of support. He opened it. He read it in full. The language was precise and formal, and left absolutely no ambiguity. The Allied Pilots Association had reviewed the available evidence and determined that Captain Raymond Holt's conduct on Flight 1147 constituted a gross violation of crew ethics, passenger safety standards, and the Union's Code of Professional Conduct. Effective immediately, the Union was withdrawing all legal support funding and representation in the matter. He put the phone down. He picked it up again. He went to Twitter. Stand with Holt was gone. In its place, trending at number 1 worldwide, the cockpit tapes. He clicked it without breathing. His own voice came out of the phone speaker, small and tinny in the quiet of the motel room, but completely, inescapably clear. I'm not checking anything. I'm not letting some diversity higher in 2B tell me how to run my ship. Who does she think she is? Probably married to a rapper. He pressed stop. He pressed stop 3 more times before remembering that the tape was everywhere now, in posts, in reposts, in the mainstream news feeds that had picked up the clip. The airline's main news feed had a statement. The FAA's press account had retweeted a news article. His phone rang. The caller ID said, Chief Pilot American, Central Airlines. He answered. His voice came out wrong, too quiet, too thin. Chief, I can explain. It was taken out of, You're terminated, Captain Holt. The voice on the other end was not angry. That was the worst part. It was the voice of a man performing an administrative function, removing a malfunctioning component from a system. Effective immediately. Gross misconduct, federal discrimination violation, and the Union has waived arbitration under the morality clause. The FAA is suspending your medical clearance pending psychiatric review. The review board has been formally notified. The room contracted around him slightly. My pension, Holt said. His voice was barely there. 30 years, Chief. I have 30 years vested. You had 30 years, the chief pilot said. The morality clause voids the pension upon termination for cause. You walked away from it on that aircraft last night. Another pause shorter, as if the chief wanted to be done with the conversation. I'm sorry, Rick. I genuinely am, but there's nothing to appeal. The call ended. Holt sat on the edge of the bed and did not move for a long time. The phone was in his lap. He could feel it vibrating, notifications arriving without pause, the world continuing to say things about him without his permission. He did not look at the screen. He stood up. He walked to the window. He pulled the curtain aside. Across the highway, O'Hare glittered in the gray morning light, enormous and indifferent. He could see the terminal. He could see, if he was honest with himself, exactly which gate they were parked at last night, gate 14. A shape among shapes completely unremarkable from this distance. And then from the private hangar at the south end of the field, a silver aircraft taxied into position at the end of the runway. Slender, quiet, immaculate, the Gulfstream G65. O catching the low morning light in a way that made it look like it was already half in the sky. He watched it accelerate. He watched it lift effortlessly with the particular grace of a machine built for nothing else, rotating into the gray Chicago morning and climbing without hesitation. Banking south, then east, shrinking steadily until it was a point, and then nothing. The sky was empty. Captain Raymond Holt had spent 30 years believing the sky belonged to him. He had defended that belief with his voice and his uniform and his absolute certainty that people like him were the ones who kept things working, who kept things in order, who knew without needing to be told who belonged up there and who didn't. He sat on the edge of the bed. The room was very quiet. The sky was empty, and he was not in it. And that for now was the entire truth of his world. Thomas Garrett boarded his rebooked flight at 8:15 the next morning, moving through the gate with the practiced ease of a man who has done this 1,000 times. He took his seat, 2A first class, his preference, and settled the way he always settled. Wall Street Journal opened water, requested the slight forward lean of a man who is already thinking about the meeting at the other end. He opened the paper. He turned to the front page. The story was above the fold. The photograph showed Vivian Caldwell at the gate of the private hangar, walking with purpose in the gray early morning, a man beside her, both of them looking forward. She looked exactly as she had looked on the aircraft, composed, unhurried, completely herself. The headline, Aviation Executive Exposes Pattern of Crew Discrimination. Cockpit Tapes Released. Pilot Fired. Thomas Garrett read the first 3 paragraphs. Then he stopped. He folded the newspaper carefully along its original creases, the way he always did, and he placed it face down on the tray table. He looked out the window at the tarmac, at the fuel truck making its rounds, at the ground crew in their yellow vests, doing their jobs in the early morning gray. He thought about the nod, the small, barely perceptible nod he had given when Holt leaned down over 2B and said, "If you're so worried about safety, maybe you should get off the plane." The nod that had said as clearly as words, "Yes, someone is restoring order here." The nod of a man who had categorized the situation in the first 2 minutes and found the categorization comfortable because it confirmed what he had already decided about who belongs where. He did not open the newspaper again. He did not order champagne. He sat with the particular uncomfortable weight of a man who has been handed a mirror at a time when he was not ready for it. He did not have words for what he was feeling. He had spent a long time in rooms where the language for this kind of reckoning was neither taught nor practiced. But he felt it. He felt the discomfort of it sitting in the seat with him for the entire flight like a quiet, uninvited companion. He earned that. Maya Torres spent the morning in a coffee shop 2 blocks from her London hotel editing. She had the full footage, 93 minutes of it, from the moment she went live to the moment Vivian addressed the cabin at the end. She worked through it methodically, cutting nothing important, adding no narration. She let the footage be what it was, a document of something that happened held steady by the hands of someone who understood that the most powerful thing she could do was not editorialize but simply keep the camera still. At the end, after the footage cut to the cabin lights going up and passengers gathering their things with the dazed, relieved motion of people emerging from something significant, she added a single title card. White text on black. 4 words. She never raised her voice. She posted the video at 11 a.m. London time. She went back to her hotel, sat on the bed, and watched the view count for 20 minutes before she made herself stop. 4 million views. In a day. The comment section was a world unto itself, stories from people who recognized what they had watched, who had sat in their own 2Bs on their own flights, and asked their own reasonable questions, and received their own versions of the same response. People writing from countries she had never visited, describing experiences she had never had, finding in the footage something that answered a question they had been carrying. She did not read all of them. There were too many. But she read enough. Marcus Webb was on the phone with his Atlantic editor when his laptop chimed with a new message. He held up one finger to the phone, looked at the screen, and went very still. The message was from an assistant email address at Caldwell Aviation Trust. Dr. Caldwell would like to thank you for your accuracy and your care with the facts. She asks whether you might be available for a longer conversation at your convenience. He looked at the phone in his hand. "I'm going to have to call you back," he said to his editor. He put the phone down. He looked at the message. He had been a journalist for 14 years. He had written pieces that mattered. Pieces that changed small things and occasionally larger ones, pieces he was proud of. But he had also spent 14 years understanding that the story that finds you the one you happen to be sitting in the right seat for at the right time is the rarest kind. It arrives without announcement. It requires only that you paid attention and wrote it down honestly. He had paid attention. He had written it down. He typed back, "I'm available whenever is convenient for Dr. Caldwell. And please tell her thank you for letting me be in the room." Sophia Reyes called the number on the gold-embossed business card exactly 72 hours after touching down in London. She had carried the card in her jacket pocket for 3 days, not because she needed to. She had the number memorized, had memorized it in the first hour, but because the physical presence of it mattered to her, the weight of it in her pocket. The small, solid reminder that the conversation on the aircraft had been real, that the woman in 2B had said those things and meant them, that Sophia had not invented the grace of being seen clearly by someone who had no obligation to see her at all. She sat on the edge of her bed in her flat and turned the card over and over in her hands. She was certain the call would reveal some misunderstanding, that the executive assistant would apologize and explain that Dr. Caldwell was unavailable, that the leave arrangement had been a gesture rather than a plan, that these things were said in the heat of a remarkable moment and couldn't reasonably be expected to materialize. She dialed. It rang twice. Dr. Caldwell's Office Operations, London, a voice warm and efficient. "You must be Sophia." Sophia's eyes filled. She pressed her lips together. She breathed carefully. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'm Sophia." The leave was confirmed. 10 days paid beginning whenever Sophia was ready. When they discussed what came after, the assistant explained that a new role had been developed. Senior crew trainer for Caldwell Aviation, leased aircraft leading the development of a crew professional standards protocol. Sophia would work with a behavioral design team and a small group of selected cabin crew from 4 airlines. The training program she developed would carry her name in the materials. Sophia was quiet for a long moment after hearing this. "I've never done anything like that before," she said. "Dr. Caldwell knows," the assistant said. "She said to tell you that's exactly why she's asking you." Sophia held the phone after the call ended, looking out her window at the London morning. She thought about the galley of Flight 147, the beverage cart behind her back, the tears she had tried to keep quiet the moment she had looked at Captain Holt and said, "I think you should go," with all the certainty she had managed to find in a split second that would turn out to matter more than most. She pressed the business card between both palms the way she had on the aircraft. She still had it. She would keep it. Eventually, when she had a desk of her own with a wall she owned the rights to, she would frame it. But first, 10 days. And after that, the work. The Federal Aviation Administration's preliminary review of Captain Raymond Holt's complete service record was at 47 pages, the longest single pilot review the Chicago District Office had processed in 3 years. The review was made public 6 weeks after the incident, per the standard disclosure schedule. Footnote 3, page 12, addressed the specific incident that had initiated the review. It read in the dry, careful language of federal documentation. The inquiry submitted by the passenger in seat 2B regarding fuel load sheet status and the weight and balance calculation adjustment required for the observed wind shear conditions was technically accurate and consistent with professional aerospace engineering expertise. The fuel load sheet was confirmed late by 12 minutes. The weight and balance recalculation required a trim setting adjustment prior to pushback. The passenger's concern was valid. She had been right, from the first word to the last. The preliminary review also uncovered 2 additional pilots on Holt's crew roster, whose conduct records showed similar complaint patterns, both placed on conditional status pending independent evaluation. The senior operations manager, who had suppressed Holt's 2023 anger management incident from his formal record, was placed on administrative leave pending a separate review. The 14 passenger complaints that had accumulated over 7 years dismissed, minimized, filed, and forgotten by a process that was designed functionally, if not intentionally, to protect the institution from accountability were now part of the public record. They had always been there. Someone had just finally looked. 3 weeks after Flight 147, Vivian Caldwell held a press conference. Not in a boardroom, not in the corporate offices of Caldwell Aviation Trust in downtown Chicago, with their panoramic views and their polished surfaces designed to convey consequence. She held it in the main terminal of O'Hare International Airport, at Gate 14, where it had started. She stood at a simple podium, no backdrop, no branding, just the ordinary terminal sounds of a working airport around her arrivals and departures continuing their ordinary rhythm. She spoke for 11 minutes. She did not use notes. She announced 3 things. The first was the Dignity in Transit initiative, effective immediately on all aircraft and in all terminals managed under Caldwell Aviation's holdings. Every passenger seatback would carry a QR code connected to an independent reporting system, not managed by any airline's internal HR department, but by an external review board with no ties to the carriers involved. Any passenger experiencing crew misconduct could report in real time. Every report would receive a response within 48 hours. Every outcome would be logged and published in an annual transparency report available to the public. There were 14 complaints in Captain Holt's file, Vivian said. 14 people who reported something and were not heard. This system is for them. It is not for me. It is not retroactive. But it is permanent. The second was the Sophia Reyes protocol. She said the name clearly. She said it twice. And then Sophia Reyes, 24 years old, standing to the left of the podium in a blazer she had bought the week before, her hands steady and her eyes bright, stepped forward and stood beside Vivian while the announcement was made. The protocol was a mandatory anti-bias and de-escalation training program for all crew on Caldwell Aviation assets, designed in partnership with a team of behavioral psychologists. Mandatory every 18 months for every crew member at every level, including specifically and without exception, senior captains. Sophia had led the design process. Her name would appear on every training document it produced. Vivian turned to look at her when she said this. Not at the cameras. At Sophia. The third announcement was the Open Cockpit Fund, a scholarship endowment for Black women and women of color pursuing careers in aerospace engineering and aviation licensing, fully funded by Caldwell Aviation. The first cohort, 12 women. The 10-year goal, 200. I built something, Vivian said, but I built it carrying weight that no one should have to carry. The next generation doesn't have to carry it the same way. That's what this fund is for, not to make the climb easier, but to make it fairer. There is a difference. When the press conference ended, Sophia stepped to the microphone. The terminal sounds continued around them. A gate announcement, a child calling for someone, the ordinary, beautiful noise of people in motion. Sophia looked at the small cluster of reporters and cameras in front of her. She had never spoken into a microphone before in any context that wasn't a safety announcement at 30,000 feet. Her hands gripped the sides of the podium. She let them. 3 months ago, she said, I was scared to go to work. I rehearsed every morning what I would say if the captain yelled at me again. I rehearsed how to make myself smaller, how to make the shift survivable. She paused. Dr. Caldwell didn't just change what happened to her on that flight. She changed what happens next. She changed what I get to do now, and the training program we built isn't about rules. The rules already existed, and he broke them anyway. It's about courage. It's about recognizing the moment and choosing the harder thing. She looked at the cameras for a moment. Then she looked at Vivian. I think you should go. Captain Holt, she said, quietly, almost to herself. And then she smiled a real, unguarded, full smile, the smile of a woman who has just understood something important about where she is standing. Now I know how to say it, she said, and I'm going to teach a lot of other people how to say it too. Raymond Holt did not get a book deal. The GoFundMe raised $61,000 before it was flagged and reviewed and quietly returned to donors. The legal fees consumed more than that. His lawyer had told him plainly that the criminal charge for striking Sergeant Rivera would result in a fine and probation, which was accurate, but that the collateral consequences, the license revocation, the pension loss, the termination for cause were not matters of criminal law and were not reversible. The FAA's psychiatric review returned a finding that used language Holt read 3 times without being able to locate himself inside it. Significant unresolved hostility responses and authority, rigidity inconsistent with safe solo aircraft command. The finding would appear in any future aviation employment search under his name. It was not possible to appeal it out of existence. He moved to Phoenix. He took a job managing logistics for a regional trucking company, not because he wanted it, but because it was available and his skill set, stripped of the cockpit, was essentially the management of complex moving schedules. He drove to work. He drove home. He did not talk about the incident with his colleagues who had found out about it anyway because these things travel. Nobody brought it up in the break room. They were not unkind. They were just people doing their jobs as he was now doing his in a world that had moved on without him. On the morning of the 6-month anniversary of Flight 1147, a reporter from the Chicago Tribune called his cell phone and asked if he had a comment on the newly launched Sophia Reyes protocol, the training program that had just been adopted by 3 additional airlines, expanding its reach to approximately 40,000 cabin crew members. He did not answer. He stared at the number until it stopped ringing. He did not call back. He drove to work on the highway. Near the exit, there was a billboard. He had passed it every morning for 2 months and had developed the efficient urban tunnel vision that makes billboards invisible through repetition. But that morning, for some reason, a shift in light, a pause in traffic, he looked at it. Caldwell Aviation. A woman in a charcoal sweater, a small, steady smile. The tagline in clean letters below her image, "Every passenger belongs here." He looked at it for as long as the traffic allowed. Then the light changed and he drove. He did not look back at the billboard, but the image stayed with him the way certain things stay, not because you want them to, but because they are simply true, and truth, once seen, has no delete button. Marcus Webb's profile piece ran in The Atlantic 8 weeks after the incident. 4,000 words, the longer conversation that Vivian had agreed to when her assistant passed along his message. They had met in the hangar lounge, the same beige leather and polished concrete, the same view of the runway. It was an afternoon this time. The weather was clear. Marcus asked her many questions. She answered most of them directly, a few of them obliquely, and one of them, the one that came at the end of an hour, delivered almost casually, the way journalists ask the question they have been building toward the entire time. She answered after a long silence. The question was, "What did you feel in the moment the handcuffs went on?" She looked out at the runway. The Gulfstream was not there today. It was somewhere over the Atlantic, ferrying a team of engineers to a site review in Oslo. The tarmac was empty. "Tired," she said. She let the word sit. Not angry, not triumphant, just tired, because it shouldn't have taken all of that. It shouldn't have required me to own the plane. It should have been enough that I was a passenger asking a legitimate safety question. That's all I was. That's all I was ever asking to be. She paused for a longer moment than Marcus had expected. He did not fill the silence. The question was right, she said finally. The fuel sheet was late. The wind shear was building. I had legitimate technical concern based on 2 decades of engineering work. And none of it was why I was able to stay on that plane. I stayed because I own the asset. And that is deeply, deeply wrong. She looked at Marcus. The fund, she said. Sophia's protocol. The reporting system. None of those are about me. None of them are about Flight 1147. They're about the women who don't own the plane. The women who have the same question, the same expertise, the same right to be heard, and have nothing to hold up when someone like Raymond Holt decides they don't belong. I want the next woman to need only a boarding pass. Just a boarding pass. The dignity should come with the ticket. Marcus wrote it down. All of it. He wrote it the way he had written everything that night in row 3. Not editorially, not interpretively, just exactly as it was said in the order it was said, trusting the words to do what words do when they are simply true. When the piece ran, that final quote became the line people shared most. I want the next woman to need only a boarding pass. 6 weeks after Flight 1147, Dr. Vivian Caldwell boarded a flight from O'Hare to London. Different airline, different terminal, same airport. She walked through the jet bridge alone, no assistant, no briefing materials, just the worn leather tote that had been with her since before the company existed. She moved at her own pace, unhurried. She always moved at her own pace. Her seat was 2B. It was always 2B when she flew alone. She had never explained this to anyone, had never been asked to explain it, but it was not a coincidence. Seat 2B on an international first-class configuration was mathematically the seat with the clearest sight line to the cockpit door, the galley, the forward emergency exit, and the maintenance log panel. It was the best information seat on the aircraft. It was also on a morning 6 weeks ago the seat where someone had tried to make her feel that she didn't belong. She requested 2B on every solo flight because she had decided cleanly and without drama that she would not be afraid of a seat number. She settled in. She placed her tote under the seat in front of her. She looked out the window at the tarmac, where a fuel truck was moving in the early morning gray, a ground crew member in a yellow vest guiding it into position with the practiced efficiency of someone who has done this 1,000 times and will do it 1,000 more. She watched it. She always watched it. "Welcome aboard, Dr. Caldwell." She turned. The flight attendant was young, 25 at most first year by the brightness of her movements, a black woman with a natural halo of hair and a name tag that read Kezia. Her smile was wide and genuine and slightly nervous in the way of someone who was good at this job and still learning how much she was good at it. "Can I get you anything before we push back?" Vivian looked at her for a moment, not measuring, not assessing, just looking the way you look at someone when you want them to understand that you actually see them. "Water would be wonderful," Vivian said. "And Kezia—" The young woman blinked. She hadn't introduced herself yet. Her name tag was there, small and silver, easily missed at the speed most passengers moved through greetings. "You're going to be wonderful at this." Kezia's smile changed register. It went from professional warmth to something unguarded and real, the smile of someone who has just been seen unexpectedly and doesn't know what to do with it except feel it. "Thank you," she said, softly. She moved toward the galley. Vivian turned back to the window. The fuel truck was in position now. She watched the connection being made, the careful, practiced steps of the refueling process, each one deliberate and specific. She noted the time. She noted the position of the adjacent gate's APU exhaust and the quality of the wind. The same things she always noted, the same quiet professional reflex of a woman who has lived inside this industry for 20 years and cannot look at an aircraft without reading it. The interphone chimed. Then the captain's voice filled the cabin, a voice that was warm and authoritative and precise and human. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Angela Moore. We have a beautiful morning ahead of us. Our fuel load is confirmed. Weight and balance has been finalized, and we have a clear window east. We'll be at cruising altitude in approximately 18 minutes and arriving at Heathrow in 8 hours and 12 minutes. On behalf of myself and the entire crew, thank you for flying with us today." The flight attendant announcement followed. The seatbelt light illuminated. Vivian closed her eyes. Just for a moment. A single, complete moment. Fuel load confirmed. Weight and balance finalized. She had asked about that once. Just that. She had asked because she knew what to ask and it mattered. She had asked, and someone had pointed a finger at her and told her to be quiet and stay in her place. And she had stood there in the aisle of a plane she owned and waited for the world to catch up with the truth she had been carrying her whole life. She opened her eyes. The city outside the window was still dark at the edges, the horizon just beginning to distinguish itself from the sky. Somewhere below, Gate 14 sat in the ordinary dark of early morning doing nothing remarkable, just another gate in a terminal of 100 gates in an airport of 100 airports. Kezia appeared with the water. She placed it with the small, careful grace of someone learning to make people feel that the gesture matters. "Thank you, Kezia," Vivian said. She lifted the glass. She looked at it for a moment. "One day I will own the plane." She had written those words on a napkin in economy class 20 years ago by a window, not unlike this one, somewhere above a country that was still deciding whether to make room for her. She had been 22 years old, and she had written the words, not in anger, not in ambition exactly, but in the quiet, stubborn conviction of someone who has decided that the story does not end with the first chapter. It hadn't. She sipped the water. Outside, the engines began their low, growing hum, the sound of potential becoming certainty of a machine ready to do the thing it was built for. The plane began to move. Vivian watched the airport slide past the terminal lights, the taxiway markings, the ground crew standing clear, their yellow vests catching the first gray of the morning. She watched O'Hare shrink from something specific into something general as the runway opened up ahead. The rotation came that particular moment weightless and absolute when the ground releases you. She felt it as she always felt it. Not as a traveler and not as an owner and not as an engineer. Just as a person going somewhere in a seat she had chosen on a morning that was hers. Make sure the next one doesn't have to fight as hard, she thought. That's the work. That's all the work, really. The plane climbed. Chicago fell away beneath them, the city's grid shrinking in the early light, and Vivian Caldwell in seat 2B watched it go calm and unhurried the way she did everything until the clouds came up around them and there was nothing outside the window but the clear, open, belonging sky. 3 months after Flight 147, Sophia Reyes stood in front of 34 flight attendants in a conference room on the 3rd floor of the O'Hare Marriott. The room was a standard training room projector screen, folding chairs arranged in neat rows, a table at the front with a laptop and a clicker and a glass of water she had not touched. She was wearing the blazer she had bought the week of the press conference. She had rewritten the opening of this session 6 times in the last 10 days. She put her notes on the table. She looked at them for a moment. Then she picked them up and put them in her bag. 3 months ago, she said, I stood in a galley on a grounded aircraft and watched a senior captain humiliate a passenger for asking about fuel weight. The room was already quiet in the way rooms get quiet when someone says something true without any preamble or staging. I didn't stop him, she continued. I wanted to. I knew it was wrong. I had known it was wrong since my first week working with him. But I was scared. I was 23 years old, and I had rehearsed every morning, before every shift, how to make myself small enough that he wouldn't turn toward me. And in the moment that actually mattered, the moment I could have said something, could have put myself between him and that passenger I was still rehearsing, no one in the room moved. I didn't stop him, she said. But I didn't lie for him either. When he turned to me at the end and asked me to confirm his version, I told him to go. She paused. That was the whole of my courage that day. 12 words. I think you should go, Captain Holt. That was it. She advanced her first slide. It was a photograph still from Maya Torres's live stream, the moment of the power reveal, 19,000 people watching through the frame. Vivian in the aisle, Holt with the handcuffs clicking, and in the background, barely visible in the edge of the frame, the galley and a small figure in uniform pressed against the beverage cart watching. Sophia had not known this photograph existed until 3 weeks ago. She had looked at it for a long time when she first saw it. She was in it. She had been there the whole time. She had been in the room where it happened. Below the photograph, one line of white text on black. She never raised her voice. Not once. That's the standard, Sophia said. Not the rule. The rules existed and they were broken anyway. The standard. The internal thing that tells you what to do before the rule has time to fire. She clicked to the next slide. What we're building is not a compliance module. It's a muscle. We're building the muscle that activates in the moment before the moment, the second before you decide whether to speak or stay quiet, whether to back the uniform or back the truth. She looked at the 34 faces in front of her. Some of them were older than she was. Some of them had been doing this for 20 years. None of them looked at their phones. I'm going to get things wrong in this program, she said. I'm 24 and I've been a flight attendant for 9 months and I've never designed training in my life. But I was in the room. I know what the moment feels like from the inside, and I have a very good idea of what it costs when you don't act on it. She took a breath. So, let's begin. Raymond Holt looked at a quiet woman in a cashmere sweater and decided before she spoke a single word that she didn't belong. He made that decision based on everything he could see and missed everything that mattered. She owned the plane. She owned the terminal. She owned the company that signed his paycheck. And even if she hadn't, even if she had been exactly who he assumed she was, a passenger with no title and no holdings and no impressive biography, she would still have deserved a professional answer to a legitimate safety question. That is the part he will spend a long time working through. The ownership was the proof. The dignity was never in question. The woman who carried a notebook on a red-eye at 22 and wrote 4 words in economy class, who showed her boarding pass to 2 men who wanted it to be wrong, who heard 100 versions of "you don't belong here" and turned every single one of them into something she was building. That woman didn't just win a flight. She built a world where the next woman carries a little less of that weight. Not none. Not yet. But less. And she built it without raising her voice once. If this story landed somewhere real for you, drop your city in the comments right now. I want to know where in the world you're watching from. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button before you go anywhere, because we have more stories like this one coming, and you do not want to miss them. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Like it if it moved you. Every like, every share, every subscribe helps these stories reach the people they're meant for. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next one.